Well, Florida senator in the first commission that looked into 9/11, the very first commission that looked into it, he went public and said that there was sufficient evidence to say that nation-state involvement was involved in the hijackers, and he just flat said, and so did George Shultz, by the way, flat came out and said, bin Laden didn't do this. He couldn't have done this. And I believe that's correct. They didn't come back and repeat that often because they also deleted it from the 9/11 study, but the senator said there was no question that there was evidence of nation-state involvement. And I'll give you a real quick reason why.
Sure.
Right at the very beginning, as the planes were hitting the World Trade Center, the White House received notice by email that they knew the plane the president was on, they knew his schedule, they knew the codes to get into the White House database, and warn that basically the president is next.
I want to ask you about
that. Done that.
No, there's no way, and I want to ask you about that when we come back. That is frightening. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm George Norrie, Craig Hulet, our special guest tonight. Craig, tell me about this email then, and then this threat that happened during 9/11.
Well, the email was sent while the towers were being hit. It was sent to the White House. It was coded, and it had language and codes and numerics attached to it that said it was clearly from an intelligence community. No simple terrorist could have the kind of knowledge that was in that email, and Dick Cheney admitted it at the time. So it was clear there was some level of intelligence involved from a nation state. And while we'll never know, just like Senator Graham said from the 9/11 Commission, the senator from Florida, he knew nation states were involved, but it was blocked and sealed. The records and files were sealed for 30 years. We're never going to know until 30 years from now, maybe, who that nation state was. But I can assure you an awful lot of speculation is very well-informed speculation that Saudi Arabia might have had a great deal to do with it, because in every foreign affairs, every war, everything like a bank bailout, everything that happens in government, the first rule of a good analyst is to look to see in whose interest these events take place.
Who profits?
Who profits? Same way a cop would follow the money trail. Somebody stands to benefit from each and every act of government, and FDR said, nothing in government happens by accident.
And now let's look at Saudi Arabia for a moment at this time. What would they gain by this horrible situation?
They eliminate one or two of their fiercest competitors. The Saudis would know that with Bush in the White House and their desire for the pipeline in Afghanistan, and the same oil companies and banks that are involved in the Caspian region are involved with the Saudis, they would know that if the Twin Towers were hit and the other jets got to the Pentagon, the fourth jet was clearly intended for the Capitol building. If these were successful, they knew full well what Bush Jr. was like, and what Bush Sr. did set the stage for it. So they knew Afghanistan and Iraq would be attacked. That gets rid of their biggest competitor and seals the pipeline deal, which they would be involved with in Afghanistan, but would have been shut out of with Iran. So they stand to gain. And there was some evidence, and I'm talking purely from fact here. This is not a bit of this is speculation.
Okay, I understand.
If I speculate, I'll tell you I'm speculating. But there were 11 Israeli Mossad agents that were jubilant in the park in New York City. They were dancing and singing as soon as they got word that the World Trade Center was hit. And
I heard that.
They were then known to be Mossad agents selling artwork in the different areas of the country where certain elite in government reside. So obviously there was some intelligence involved to successfully achieve it. But again, Bush is not going to tell us, and Bush didn't want to tell us what was really going on. He decided that the only way the American people, and I'm sorry to have to put it this way, as ignorant and fundamentally illiterate on political issues we are, the only way he could justify the wars was to say they hate our institutions. Yeah. And I kept saying, I was the first one to be interviewed live in Washington, D.C. on September 20th, and I was asked by Bohannon to rebut Bush's speech right after 9/11. It was September 20th. I was the first live interview to rebut Bush in the Beltway. And that was probably the most painful experience of my life because I had to listen to the speech before going on the air, and I was absolutely stunned that he would make the kind of ridiculous assertions he made. And all I could think of to say for the rest of the year was, it's the targets, stupid. Look what the targets were. Yeah. They're not attacking if they wanted to be terrorists and attack Americans and hurt Americans because they hate our institutions, they would have hit Disneyland.
Yeah.
They hit the World Trade Organization because it is the symbol of the Western economic power that is, in fact, dominating many of these countries, and they are not happy. And they've been doing that for decades.
Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. I voted for Bush in 2000. I did not vote for him in 2004. Now, I want to ask you a question. Today is September the 11th, 2001. You are president. The Twin Towers are on the ground. There's a hole in the Pentagon. I don't want to hear what you're not going to do. I want to hear what you are going to do as president in 2001.
You talking to me?
I'm talking to Hewitt, whoever he is, or Hewlett.
Well, that's Craig.
Craig, yeah.
Well, first of all, there was no reason to remove the Taliban from power. I would have sent out the largest...
Oh, wait a minute. They were complicit.
No, they weren't. The Taliban had nothing to do with it.
To go on. Okay.
Taliban had absolutely nothing to do with it.
I don't want to hear about that. What are you going to do?
Well, you've interrupted me before I could finish.
Okay.
I would have done what I already know is in place. One of my closest friends over these years is Bob Brown. I've written articles for him. His magazine is Soldier of Fortune magazine. I've also submitted papers to the U.S. Army War College. I would have gone after the perpetrators of the act, which was a nation state. We know it was a nation state because the first commission on 9/11, Bob Graham, openly stated, we know that there were several nation states involved in 9/11, both funding, intelligence, all of it. But the FBI came in and took all of those records, removed them from the commission, Bob Graham's commission, and put them under top secret and held them for 30 years. So we'll know actually the nation states involved in 9/11, that would be in how many years now? We got about 22 years to wait?
Yeah.
And then we'll know the truth.
Well,
what would I have?
I don't know what you would have done.
Well, I can tell you what I would have done, but it's a silly question, to be honest with you.
Well, your answer was silly.
No, that's the answer was not silly. That answer was so profound.
Wasn't silly either, you idiot.
What's that? Oh, I'm an idiot because I didn't answer the question the way he wanted me to. The Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11, and the Taliban and Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. So you can't make the argument, and nobody that's a thinking person can make the argument that Saddam Hussein was working with bin Laden. Bin Laden hated Saddam Hussein because he controlled a secular state and allowed different Muslims to worship Christians and Jews. Bin Laden hated... Oh, the only thing Bin Laden hated more than Saddam Hussein was the Saudi regime.
Now, one of the nation states, because you were talking about the fact that there was information that was taken away from the committee that had to do with nation states, one of the things you've said in the past is Saudi Arabia had something to do with 9/11.
Absolutely. There's no question in my mind that in 22 years, and I'll be right, mark it on your calendar, in 22 years when these documents are finally released through the National Security Archives, it will make explicit, not imply, it'll be explicit that we have intelligence at the time, 9/11, that Saudi Arabia was involved in 9/11. And they knew that if that this country was attacked, the Twin Towers or anything in a sizable manner, that if this country was attacked, the first thing George Bush Jr. would do is attack their arch enemy,
which would be
Saddam Hussein. And that's why they would have done it. Would they be Machiavellian enough to be best friends with George Bush Sr. and yet send their people to attack the Twin Towers? Machiavellianism originated in the Arab nation states, the Bedouins, the desert chieftains, the warlords, not in Italy.
So now, are you saying that the government did, or members that influential people within Saudi Arabia were involved?
Well, their country's run by an enormous family that. They are the family, the royal family. That they are the head of the military, the Secret Service, the spy units, the militias.
So they're too interconnected not to have known what was going on.
They're as interconnected as our corporate nexus with Washington and the federal government is now for us. So, there's no question that this thing has worked out really well for Saudi Arabia.